Today we are starting with the 40th lecture of most important current affairs. And now this lecture and onwards is very important. This is most important current affairs series in that we are in the most important phase. UPSC has a demand. It will ask you questions from 1.5 years and maybe 2 years. But the last 4 months are very important. For example, for this year, May, June, July, August current affair is very important. March, April, May, and we have already completed very comprehensively in 1 to 39 lecture. Today in the 40th lecture, we are starting with the June current affairs, then we will go to July and see 10 to 15 days of August also. In that section also, in June also, we are starting with one of the most, we can say, important, that is your environment section. We will be covering various topics comprehensively. It will be very comprehensive, and it is desired and it is required and it is an effort from our side that we do not leave any topic which came in these months like June, July and August, 10 to 15 days. And when we talk about this lecture, 40th lecture, we are going to see the environment section and environment section of the June current affair 2020. These 4 topics I have selected for today. One is Seabed 2030 project. What is seabed? Seabed is the architecture of your sea, the bottom of the sea, how it is made and how does it look like, what is the mapping, what is the geography of the seabed. So for that we have been doing mapping. We have a project 2030 and now it has come to the report that 1/5 of the seabed is already mapped. So we will see which organization is releasing this seabed mapping. What is Seabed 2030 project? Second is India's first lichen park. You know the symbiotic relationship between algae and fungi is lichen. So in Uttarakhand Forest Department has created India's first lichen park. Simply various species of lichen together in a park. That's it. Second topic. Third topic is very important. This topic is a bit conceptual. Direct question possibility is very less, but still I will be explaining you because anyway you have to give the mains, right? So you have to complete some of the topics before also. So we will go by this. First of all, you should know that it is the first time that India is releasing its first own assessment of climate change and its impact over the Indian region only. Okay, this is not for South Asia and Southeast Asia and the world level. Till now we were taking the data from Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and IPCC report influenced our policies and the measures by the government. But now the Indian government, Ministry of Earth Sciences with some other institutions has come with the assessment of climate change over the Indian region. First report, first version of the report. We will see what is that and what does the report say. Does it have some measures also for the improvement of your climate change condition, or we can counter them or we can mitigate them? Fourth is a small topic, Nagar One scheme. This is just about urban forestry scheme which has been announced by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, but the implementation will happen at the state level. So these 4 topics we are going to cover. Let us start with the first topic, Seabed 2030 project. Why this project is in news? It has been announced by your Seabed 2030 project that nearly a fifth of the world's entire ocean floor now has been mapped. This news came in June. So we need to know what is Seabed 2030 project. This is a project between 2 organizations. On the one side we have JEPCO. I will tell you the details about JEPCO. Don't worry. This is a prelims question possibility also. What is JEPCO? So it is a collaborative project between 2 organizations. One is JEPCO. I will be telling the detail about JEPCO. No worries. And the second is Nippon Foundation of Japan. So you do not need to know about the Nippon Foundation of the Japan. Just like your Nippon battery, you remember. So Nippon, you will remember, okay, this is from Japan. So Nippon Foundation from Japan and JEPCO, both of these together collaborated and produced a project, Seabed 2030 project. Aim of the project is what? See the mapping of the sea. This is not exactly visible to the eyes. This is an estimation. This is done on the basis of various types of data, various type of sources. So after collaborating all that data, scientists come up with the seabed mapping like this. So for that, JEPCO and Nippon Foundation have been collaborated and they will together facilitate the complete mapping of the global ocean floor by 2030. What is the use? Why we are mapping the global ocean seabed? I will tell you about that also. Don't worry. This project launching is very important. This project was launched in 2017 under the auspices of United Nations Ocean Conference. So what is United Nations Ocean Conference? This is not an annual conference, right? This is a conference which happened in 2017 only. In that conference, United Nations Ocean Conference, this project Seabed 2030 was launched. And that project was launched by JEPCO and Nippon Foundation of the Japan. JEPCO is not from Japan, okay? Nippon Foundation is from Japan. So how they are taking the data, how they map it, it coordinates this Seabed 2030 project we are talking about. It coordinates and oversees the sourcing and compilation of bathymetric data. What is bathymetric data? Bathymetric data simply means measurement of a structure, depth and shape of your ocean floor. That is bathymetric data. You will not forget this if I tell you that this detail of the bathymetric. If I break the word, you will get two words, right? Bathy and metric. Metric is measurement, not a problem. And bathy is what? Bathy is bottom. In Greek, bathy means bottom or very deep. So we are taking the deep sea ocean data about the mapping and structure and shape. That is your bathymetry. So this project coordinates various data and oversees various data, compiles all bathymetric data from where? From different parts of the world oceans through its 5 centers. Your JEPCO, this organization, JEPCO has available grids, okay? These grids are present, that means they are somewhere fixed in a way that they provide bathymetric data. This has 5 centers, okay? And these 5 centers of your Seabed 2013 project will feed data into freely available JEPCO grid. Grid will take the data and we will have the ocean mapping, seafloor mapping. So will the image, will the data and everything will be very high quality? Yes. These projects aim to have a resolution of minimum resolution of 100 meter inside the sea. At the bottom of the sea, even 100 meter is very, very appreciated. So what are the techniques used? Deep water hull mounted sonar system. Just like your radar system, we have the sonar system. Sonar system will be used. This is how the sonar system is also used to locate any airplane brakes, goes inside the water. For example, happened in Australia, Indonesia flight. So it went inside the water and scientists were trying to locate it through your sonar system. The black box and everything was being tried to be located by sonar system. Sonar system will tell you the depth of the ocean, a structure of the ocean, that which part of the ocean is returning the sound waves in a time and which part is taking more time. So we will know the topography of the ocean. And also there can be camera, underwater vehicles. These are very, for example, recently happened, some of the scientists, or you can say some of the scientists, not some of the adventurers, tried to go inside the Mariana Trench as much as possible. They went through underwater vehicles that could bear very, very high level of oceanic pressure inside the deep water. So these underwater vehicles can be used. So how much data we have in the JEPCO grid? Today we have impressive 14.5 million square kilometers of new bathymetric data included in the latest JEPCO grid, and that area is almost twice the size of Australia. That is why we have mapped the 1/5 of the oceanic floor, right? 1/5 of the oceanic floor. So what you need to remember? You need to remember this project. You need to remember these two bodies. You need to remember the United Nations Ocean Conference 2017. A small introduction about that, so that you might not think that okay, this is happening annually. No, not annually. See, the heading is United Nations Ocean Conference only. Is it like 2017, 18, 19 or 2020? No, that means only one time. 2017 United Nations Ocean Conference was a United Nations conference that took place June 5th to 9th 2017. Okay, and it seeks to mobilize action for the conservation and sustainable use of ocean, seas and marine resources. For conservation and protection and sustainable use, you also need to know the structure of the ocean, the bathymetric data, how the ocean is mapped, how the ocean floor is. Then only you can conserve them, right? Tomorrow, if you don't know the topography of the ocean and you are putting your internet cables inside that cables may damage some coral reef, or that cables may damage some habitat of the organisms. So you need to map it, right? Ocean flooring. So that is, ocean flooring is also part of your United Nations Ocean Conference mandate in 2017, and JEPCO and Nippon Foundation came together trying to map the ocean floor with the Seabed 2030 project. So all clear now, but not clear one thing. One thing is not clear, that is JEPCO. Let's break it. JEPCO is General Bathymetric Chart of the Oceans. This is a publicly available bathymetric chart for everyone of the world oceans. It operates under joint auspices of International Hydrographic Organization and Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. So UNESCO has this Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. What about International Hydrographic Organization? International Hydrographic Organization is an intergovernmental organization and it represents your hydrography and everything. Today, almost 2 years back or 1 year back, it had 93 member states. It has an observer status at the United Nations. So, is it a very new organization? International Hydrographic Organization? No, it was established in 1921. That time its name was IHB, International Hydrographic Bureau. Present name was adopted in 1970. See its achievements: exploration of the seabed and movements of the sea, a standardization of maritime activities, hydrographic terminology, marine cartographic products. Cartography is geography. So it deals with those things. Next important thing, is India a member of International Hydrographic Organization? Yes, see, India is a member. What about Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission? Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. It is present in UNESCO. It was established by a resolution 2.31 adopted by the General Conference of UNESCO. India is a member too. So now you understood both the organizations under which this operates. JEPCO, General Bathymetric Chart of Oceans, operates under International Hydrographic Organization and Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission is under UNESCO and International Hydrographic Organization is also a intergovernmental body, but this has an observer status at United Nations. Now come to the PowerPoint. So JEPCO is the only intergovernmental organization with a mandate. This is a chart actually. Organization, more than that, it is a chart. But anyway, this is an initiative of your IHO and IOC with a mandate to map the entire ocean floor. Only organization having the mandate to map the entire ocean floor, entire bathymetric data is JEPCO. Very important. Intergovernmental organization, not an NGO. The General Bathymetric Chart of the Ocean is a publicly available bathymetric chart of the world oceans. Publicly available, already told you. The project was conceived with the aim of preparing a global series of charts showing the general shape of the seafloor. Why general shape? Even in the newest project, the resolution desired is 100 meter, okay? 100 meter. So that is why general shape of the seafloor. You can't have the very minute seafloor just like your 5 megapixel camera. JEPCO operates under the joint auspices of, already told you, International Hydrographic Organization and Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. This is of UNESCO and this has an observer status as United Nations. So why do we need to study the ocean floor? By studying the ocean floor or having the knowledge of bathymetry, deep ocean measurement, you can understand various natural phenomena and so that you can prepare for them. Or maybe you can encourage science by understanding natural phenomena. Your ocean circulation, already told you about this organization, the previous organization that studies the ocean circulation. You can understand the tides, low tide, high tide. You can understand about the biological hotspot where more biodiversity is present, so that you can take extra protective measures to protect those biological hotspots. It also provides key inputs for navigation. First you understand that, okay, fine, below this sea level there is no mountain. So you will avoid that, you will go through that area. And if there is a mountain, you can see a small bit of it, but that can be dangerous, just like your Titanic had an accident with the iceberg, right? So better navigation, better forecasting of tsunamis, because tsunamis are dependent on earth. And once you understand the earthquake, you will understand the tsunami. Exploration for oil and gas projects also, building offshore wind turbines also, where to put the wind turbine, where can be more wind. Your fishing resources, because you will be knowing the biological hotspots, so you will be knowing the fishing resources also. And I already told you, for laying internet cables and pipelines also, you need to have the data of the ocean floor. That's it. That is why we are mapping them. This data becomes highly valuable during disaster situation because you can prepare themselves. That is why somehow your Nippon Foundation of Japan is participating, right? They have a huge stack because Japan is various times affected by your tsunamis and earthquakes from the ocean. You can have a better understanding of climate change also after knowing the ocean floor. For example, many volcanoes are coming from the ocean areas. Vertical mixing of the ocean water and ocean currents. Don't you know your monsoon is affected by El Nino phenomenon, southern oscillation? All are ocean phenomena only. Your warm current and cold current. Also, now adding one more value, once you map the entire ocean floor properly, it can help you achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 14. What is 14? This is about conservation of marine resources, conservation of the sea. So we will see the goal 14, and also let's revise your sustainable development goals for once. It has been a long time, right? So we will revise sustainable development goals. These are your sustainable goals. How many in number? 17. These are 17 sustainable goals. Can you see 14? Life below water. That is why JEPCO becomes important. That is why seafloor mapping becomes important. What about the other? You are just requested to pause the video and just go through 1 to 17. If you want to remember, you can, but UPSC will not directly ask you the question that which goal is concerned about what. I just wanted to show you this. But my purpose is not this, okay? I will tell you the whole story of the sustainable development goals, how they came into the picture, and what before sustainable goals. What was that? We will deal with Millennium Development Goal. We will also see Sustainable Development Goals, and we will see how they have developed. The entire story will be discussed. Before that, just remember that every goal has various targets. It's not fixed for any goal like 4 targets or 5 targets. No, it is variable. And for your 17 goals, overall you have 169 targets. So one goal can have 4 to 5, 2 to 3 targets. According to that 1 to 17 goals in total have 169 targets. Now see the evolution of sustainable development goals. The story I would like to start with: poverty is the greatest polluter. This is a statement that poverty is the greatest polluter of the world. This statement was made by your former Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. But where was this statement made? This statement was made in Stockholm. Why Stockholm? She was in a conference, and that conference has the origin of Sustainable Development Goals. United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. UNCHE. It is not generally formally called UNCHE, but United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. This United Nations Conference on Human Environment was held in Stockholm, the capital of Sweden. It happened almost for a week, June 5 to June 16 in 1973. It was attended by your former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, where she made the statement that your poverty is the greatest polluter of the world. Who convened this meeting? The convening of the meeting was done by United Nations General Assembly, UNGA. I have already told you about the all organs of the United Nations, no confusion about that. So United Nations General Assembly convened this meeting, and Sweden was decided that Sweden, Stockholm, will hold this, or you can say host this event in 1972. Also remember that during this meeting only United Nations Environment Program was decided to come. UNEP was created as a result of this conference, United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. So you know the origin of UNEP also. Can you please tell me the headquarters of the UNEP? Very surprising. Actually, the rich nations and the poor nations had a fight here. So the poor nation said that if you really care about the poor nation, why not create at least one United Nations organization's headquarters in the poor country? So one poor country, one underdeveloped country was given this opportunity, and UNEP Environment Program, UNEP headquarters is not in a developed country but instead in a developing country. So can you please tell me the name of that developing country which has the headquarters of United Nations Environment Program? Anyway, this meeting ended in a Stockholm Declaration. Okay, various things, principles of a Stockholm Declaration, 26 principles about human rights, natural resources, wildlife. So wildlife, yeah, when Indira Gandhi came in India, then she made this Wildlife Protection Act because of this Stockholm Declaration, and the wildlife and your forest were brought from your state list to concurrent list. It also talked about pollution. It also talked about poverty, underdevelopment, everything. But one of the main seminal issues that emerged from the conference is the recognition for poverty alleviation. We need to end poverty, otherwise we cannot protect the environment. If a country is poor, it will exploit its natural resources and the environment will be endangered. The Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi is credited with this poverty alleviation program or having a say about that. First end poverty, then only environment can be protected. Her speech is remembered in this conference. Now let us connect the dots. In 1972 this happened, meeting in Stockholm under the United Nations General Assembly, and Sweden was hosting it at Stockholm. Indira Gandhi attended, every country attended. So in 1972 governments met in Stockholm. Fine, Sweden. And the meeting was United Nations Conference on Human Environment. The main theme was rights of a family to a healthy and productive environment, or right of the population for a healthy and productive environment. A productive environment where there is interdependency between the environment and the population. After that, almost 10 years or 11 years after that, in 1983 what happened? United Nations created World Commission on Environment and Development. This commission is only later it was known as Brundtland Commission. It created a report, Brundtland Report. See, 1972, a Stockholm conference, this happened. In 1983, United Nations created a commission, World Commission on Environment and Development. This commission is known as Brundtland Commission. And this Brundtland Commission only gave the definition of sustainable development and said that sustainable development means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That means you live your life, but you do not live your life in a way that jeopardizes the life of your grandchildren. They can also fulfill your needs their needs in the future, and you also live happily. That is how you use your environment. That is called sustainable development. If you over exploit, the future generation will be affected. Anyway, now you know in 1992 everyone knows that Rio Earth Summit happened, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED, or Rio Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. In that Rio de Janeiro meeting, UNFCCC came, Convention on Biological Diversity came, many things came. Along with that, first agenda for environment and development also came. That agenda was now known as Agenda 21. Why Agenda 21? In that moment, 1992, in Rio, various countries said that by 2021, we will be achieving everything about the Sustainable Development Goal. But later it was realized that by 2021 it is not possible. We should go about 2030. So now that Agenda 21 name was changed. But before that, first of all, a study about Agenda 21 which came from Rio Earth Summit. Agenda 21, it was non-binding. Sustainable Development Goal is also non-binding. Agenda 21, it came from the United Nations regarding sustainable development. It is a product of Earth Summit or Rio Earth Summit, that is United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 1992. So Agenda 21 is not even your 2021. It is about 21st century, sorry. So by 21st century, that means around 2000, we will be achieving your development goals, sustainable goals. Since your 2000, it was found that it was over optimistic date. So the new timeline is for sustainable development goal 2030. So no Agenda 21 now. At the dawn of the 21st century, we could not achieve our sustainable development goal. Now the target is 2030. Anyway, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development Rio Summit happened in your Rio de Janeiro in 1992. Just 20 years after that, Rio Plus 20 happened. Remembering that just after 2 decades completion, in 2012, you count 9 years there in the last century, and then you have 12 years here, 8 plus 12, 20 years. United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development happened now. See, here United Nations Environment and Development, Conference on Environment and Development. But 20 years after that, Rio Plus 20 happened, United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. Why this? Because other things, UNFCCC, Convention on Biological Diversity, they went in a different direction. But your Agenda 21 or Sustainable Development Goal went in this Rio Plus 20 direction. 20-year follow-up to UNCED, United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. This Rio Plus 20 is known as UNCSD, United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development only. Now this is not about Kyoto Protocol and everything, ozone. No. This is United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, Rio Plus 20. Before that, in 2011, Just 1 year before your Rio Plus 20, this nation Colombia said that we should have some sustainable development goals. As we are going in sustainable development conference, Colombia is also Latin America country. Your Brazil is also your South America country. So Colombia said that why not have some sustainable development goals for your UNCESD meeting in Rio Plus 20? This 2011 meeting was held in Indonesia. That time Colombia proposed that we should have some SDG when we meet in Rio Plus 20 or Brazil. Much of the discussion happened about 17 development goals, sustainable development goals in your Rio Plus 20 meeting. Finally, in January 2013, 30-member United Nations General Assembly Open Working Group on Sustainable Development Goals was established. So this whole post-2015 development agenda, this agenda ran from the discussion, reporting and everything happened. Ban Ki-moon also said something that time, United Nations Secretary General. This happened from 2012, that is Rio Earth Summit, Rio Plus 20 actually, to 2015, and it was discussed by United Nations to define the future global development framework that would succeed the Millennium Development Goal. From 2000 to 2015, you had Millennium Development Goal, MDG, and after that 3-year discussion in this period 2012 to 2015 resulted in Sustainable Development Goals to succeed Millennium Development Goal. Okay, Millennium Development Goal ended in 2015. Now you have Sustainable Development Goal from 2016 to 2030. Whatever we could not achieve in this Millennium Development Goal, we will have that achievement in Sustainable Development Goal, and various other goals are also added according to the change of the time. Finally, but the list of the 17 SDGs and their targets indicator, it was published by UN resolution in July 2017 only. You must be confused about MDG development, but that is not important because that is an old story. We have SDG over MDG, so we do not need to know them. But just remember that MDGs were developed out of several commitments set forth in Millennium Declaration. That Millennium Declaration was signed in 2000, and after that we had MDG from 2000 to 2015. Its targets and goals, nothing is to be remembered. See, about Sustainable Development goals, I would like to tell you something more. SDGs set in 2015, told you this already. 2012 to 2015 the discussion happened. This was set in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly. Remember that General Assembly. And achievement should be done by 2030 on all the targets and all the goals. And the UN resolution also, you should remember, UN resolution 70/1, the 2030 agenda. 70/1, okay, 2030 agenda. Finally, the targets and indicators were included in a UN resolution adopted by the General Assembly 6 July 2017. A little bit late, 2 years late, 2017 resolution was accepted by the General Assembly. That's the whole story of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now a very important topic, very easy topic. India's first lichen park. Country's first lichen garden has been created where? In Munsiari. This is Munsiari. This is a hill station in Uttarakhand, Pithoragarh district. That district only where you have Kala Pani. Yeah, right. I told you about the map, the Kala Pani, na? International relation. So in the last 1 to 39 lecture. So your Munsiari is in Pithoragarh district of the Uttarakhand. This is a hill station. In that area, the Uttarakhand Forest Department, not your Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, okay? Uttarakhand Forest Department has created a lichen garden. And this is a new initiative. In India, there was no lichen garden. So this is country's first lichen garden. So it becomes important for your prelims. This Munsiari or your Pithoragarh is in Kumaon region in Pithoragarh district by State Forest Department. This area is in Kumaon region. Your Uttarakhand has two regions, Kumaon region and Garhwal region. Have you seen the map? This is your Uttarakhand, right? This area, the light yellow area, this area is Garhwal division. So when you go to Haridwar or when you go to Dehradun, these are, or Rudraprayag even, Chamoli hill station, these areas are in Garhwal division. What about your Kumaon division? Kumaon division is this. Nainital, Almora, these are in Kumaon division. And see your Pithoragarh district adjoining Nepal. Here is the Kalapani issue, right? Here is the Kalapani issue. Here is your pass. That pass is known as, forgot it, Limpia Dora, Kalapani, Lipu Lake Pass. This area is claimed by Nepal. Nepal says that Kalapani river dividing Uttarakhand and Nepal, this river has the origin here, okay, Limpiadora. So it says that origin is here, and if you divide the two countries along the river bank, your Kali river or Sarda river, whatever you call it, so the boundaries would become like this. So give us this area. India says that no, Kalapani comes from here, the main area. So we are dividing like this. This here you have the tri-junction where you have Lipu Lake. Tri-junction, either in your Tibet or you can call China, your mercy, and India and Nepal. Pithoragarh district of the Uttarakhand. Here you have been. Here you have this lichen park by the State Forest Department. And Nepal claims this area as part of Sudur Pakshim district. Not district, actually Sudur Pashchim province. Let's come to the topic. Your Munsiari is considered as hotspot of lichens. This is a mountain area, right? So there are so many algae and fungi together collaborating in symbiotic relationship. Algae provides the food because algae is photosynthesizing, and your lichen provides the support. You see, it grows like rock. So lichen provides the support. Lichen also helps algae absorb the moisture from the ground very good. So locally you know this as jhula or patthar ka phool, growing on the rock, because lichen is your fungi is providing the support, right, and algae is growing over it. So it locally it is known as patthar ka phool or jhula. This park is spread over 1.5 acres. You do not need to remember that. And almost 80 species of lichens have been brought together, collected from across the Himalayan state. All the lichen species have been collected from Uttarakhand only. Uttarakhand has a very rich lichen species diversity, almost 600. See, in India you have 2714 species of lichens. In world you have 20,000. In India you find 2714. Out of that 600 is in Uttarakhand. So very good number. What are lichens? Already told you. Lichen is a symbiotic composite organism. This is not a species, right? This is a collaboration symbiotic relationship between algae and fungi. But on the algae side or plant side, you can also have cyanobacteria. You call it Bruggen algae, but actually cyanobacteria is prokaryote. Just like your bacteria and everything. But this is photosynthesizing. Cyanobacteria. So you call it blue-green algae. Algae and cyanobacteria on one side, and on another side you have fungi species. So lichen is present only on alpine areas? No. From high alpine elevation to sea level you have lichen. They can grow on almost any surface. That is why patthar ka phool. What are the different uses of lichen? You know, in many cuisines people use lichen. Even your Hyderabad biryani has lichen. Lichen is also used as natural indigenous perfume. In Kannauj area, the perfumers use this indigenous perfume is made by lichen. Lichen can also be used to create sunscreen, cream, dyes, some medicine also. Lichen have a very good indicator function of bioindicator of pollution, because some lichen species are very tolerant to nitrogen and sulfur compounds. Some are exactly not tolerant, they will die. So if we know that some species are growing and most of the species are not growing, so some species which are growing and they are dependent on nitrogen and sulfur compound, you will know that there is pollution. So they can indicate the air pollution, they can act as bioindicators. You understood this concept? Some lichen species are tolerant to nitrogen and sulfur, and most of the others are not tolerant. That is, they are sensitive, they will die out. So once in a place you have only those species which are tolerant to nitrogen and sulfur, you must know that other species have died, and this species is only surviving which is tolerant to nitrogen and sulfur. That means atmosphere has nitrogen and sulfur, which are both pollutants. So your lichen can work as bioindicator of the pollution in the air. Generally lichens require clean air only, but some are nitrogen and sulfur tolerant. Lichens are also under threat. Overexploitation for these industries. Urbanization is not giving them a space. Deforestation is happening. Pollution is happening. So all will not survive on nitrogen and sulfur. Many die. So pollution is also a problem. Now our next topic is not very important for prelims, but you should just see some facts and it will help you in mains. So for creating some points like weather change and climate change, the report exactly is not will not be the main answer, but you can have some data, okay? Because this is just exactly parallel to IPCC, international intergovernmental panel on climate change. IPCC creates the report of assessment of the world climate change and everything and impact. But now India has come up with its own report for the Indian region only. So this thing becomes important. You can fetch some data in the mains answer, and also for prelims you can have some guesswork according to this. So the report is named as Assessment of Climate Change over the Indian region. This is the name of the report. Who is coming up with this report? See, a report by Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India. So Ministry of Earth Sciences has released assessment of climate change over the Indian region only. So UPSC might confuse you that this is for South Asia. No, only Indian region. And also they do not give the state-wise differentiation and data. They give the overall picture. See, did not specify regions or a state that would suffer due to those weather conditions in the future. The report is very negative. The report says that the weather and climate will change and it will affect. You will have more heavy rainfall days, you will have floods, you will have droughts, you will have warmer days, you will have heat waves. But it doesn't give the specific region or a state that would suffer more or less because of these weather conditions in the future. Not very specific, but yeah, some data is provided. Can you tell me all the departments of Ministry of Earth Sciences in the comment? If you don't know, you can just copy from the Wikipedia, and also some institutions of this ministry. This is very important. So till now we were dependent on Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. This IPCC was a report for, it came for the worldwide, it came for the region, and it also discussed national conditions. So we dependent on that report for planning our policies and mitigation measure by the government. Now we are having our own assessment of climate change over the Indian region report. This is spearheaded by climate experts at Indian Meteorological Department IMD and Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. These both organizations are related to your Ministry of Earth Sciences only. That is why I am seeking an answer from you about this. Do you know the department and everything institutions of the Ministry of Earth Sciences? This report has been discussing the data from 1951 to 2015, and the data is atmospheric also, and the data is oceanic also. See, the ocean data also, and the atmospheric data also has been considered between the period 1951 to 2015, just after your Azadi. It has different chapters on temperature, rainfall and climate change. So how do we go about this report? There is a way out. I will explain you the conceptual parts, okay? And then comes the data and everything, that how much temperature has risen, how many rainfalls will happen, how much the wetness will increase or decrease, how many heat waves will have. So all these things are not to be remembered. You just have to pause the video that time and go through that. I will not be explaining that, but the conceptual things, everything I will explain. Let us first talk about temperature. In this page only concepts. The report says that heat waves to severe heat wave condition over large geographical areas than present day could be a norm in the coming years. So if you are in Delhi, particularly if you are in North India, it says that in the Indo-Gangetic plain or North India, we will see many heat wave conditions. Normally your heat waves last for 1 week to 10 days. From March to May it any time comes, and one spell lasts for 1 week to 10 days. But now it says that no, more heat waves will come and every spell will last longer. Even your minimum temperature has risen by 0.13 degrees Celsius between 1951 and 2015. What about warming? It says that your pre-monsoon, March to May month, this is very hot. This is reported to have greater warming, followed by your post-monsoon, October to December. Why not monsoon time? Monsoon time is having rain. So warming remained the least for the June to September, because this is monsoon season over the entire country. So rain will reduce the temperature. It says that pre-monsoon time will have more temperature rise, March to May. Then October to December will follow the receding monsoon. But in the monsoon time, you will have less temperature because of rain. Even your nights will become warmer in the future, just like days. Now, this is data about temperature, okay? Here I would like you to pause the video and see this data. But one thing I would like to highlight, by the end of the 21st century. Why am I highlighting this? Because these are the target for your Paris climate deal also, 21st century. We require to reduce your global temperature by at least 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial level. Otherwise, they are also trying that if possible reduce it by 2 degrees Celsius. But things in a way they are going, it is not possible even 2 degrees Celsius. But anyway, those are the targets. 1.5 degrees Celsius mandatory. Otherwise, they are trying for 2 degrees Celsius. And compared to the pre-industrial revolution. Pre-industrial level means when your industry originated in England, first industrial revolution. By the end of the 21st century, the report says that India's average temperature over India is projected to rise by 4.4 degrees Celsius relative to the average temperature during 1976 to 2005 period. This period, 1976 to 2005 period, they are taking the average and saying that according to this average, by the end of the 21st century, your Indian temperature, okay, local temperature, surface temperature will be more 4.5 degrees Celsius more. Why? The reason I will read, because you have greenhouse gases, okay, and sometimes it can be reduced to an extent. It is being countered by your anthropogenic forces like aerosols. Aerosols reflect the sunlight, so they reduce the temperature, the sulfur compounds and all. And those are liberated from volcano also. So every volcano actually globally cools down the temperature, every volcano eruption, because of sulfur compounds. Land use change is happening, you are having more forest area, so sometimes they are countering, but overall still the temperature will increase because of the greenhouse gases. Now for these points you can pause the slide, but remember that this is not important. North India have undergone warming more than South, also you need to remember that. North India is warming more and South India is seeing the warm winters. What about rainfall? The report says that the country's annual all India rainfall during this period 1951 to till now, this period showcased a declining trend. That means the overall rainfall has decreased. Reduced rainfall activity will do what? Reduced rainfall activity will lead to your food security problem. But anyway, this rainfall has been observed mostly in Indo-Gangetic Plain and Western Ghat. These are the areas where the most of the rains happened. But still in Indo-Gangetic Plain and Western Ghat, you have less rainfall now. So in an agrarian country like India, cultivation will take a hit because these are the belts, Indo-Gangetic plain particularly. This is the green area, rain-fed area. Why this is happening? Again, anthropogenic activities over the northern hemisphere could have played some role for this declining rainfall. But problem is that rainfall is decreasing overall. But we have heavy rainfall days that can lead to flood, and those water, the storm water is not even being utilized. Flooding can lead to loss of life, property and livelihoods. The landslides like Idukki landslide can happen. Even your tabletop airport is threatened by heavy rainfall in a very short span of time. You had recently accident because it became slippery. But this is a small region. Overall, you can have loss of life, property and livelihoods because of flooding. So this is data about your monsoon. Summer monsoon rainfall has declined 6% over India between 1951 and 2015. See, 6% decline. Frequency of localized heavy rain occurrences as well as dry spells has significantly increased. That means overall that the extreme of the weather has increased. Whether it is localized, local area, heavy rainfall, or whether it is dry spell like happened in Latur, these extremes have increased, but the average of the rainfall has decreased. And you see the precipitation areas of precipitation in Jammu, Kashmir and Northwest India has increased. Northwest India is what? Your desertic area. If you go to Jaipur, recently the very huge flood happened in Jaipur, and that was because of localized heavy rainfall. That is extreme of the weather. It says that there will be annual variability of rainfall associated with monsoon now. What about the droughts and floods, natural disasters? Report says that since 1950s, frequency and intensity of both heavy rainfall events and dry events have gone up. So you are having the flood or you are having the drought. The frequency has increased. Very specifically, this trend are prominent over central India and southern peninsular region. That is why I took the name of Latur. Central India, in Madhya Pradesh, sometimes flood is happening. In south peninsular area, the flooding is happening and sometimes drought is happening. Flood risk is more at your eastern coast, West Bengal, eastern Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, Konkan, and cities like Mumbai, Chennai. You remember Mumbai, Chennai flood? Every time, almost every time, Chennai and Mumbai see some kind of flood. Kolkata also is threatened by flood now. Why this is happening after 1950, more flood and more drought? Due to enhanced occurrence of localized short duration intense rainfall, we are seeing more flooding events since 1950. You remember your Netflix is creating some, Netflix or Discovery probably, or National Geographic is creating some documentary over Uttarakhand flood. Uttarakhand flood happened because of your cloud bursting and also glacier melting. Himalayan flood basins are projected to greater floods due to the faster glacial and snow melting. So global temperature is increasing. Your glacier will melt, snow will melt, that will come in the river and cause flood. So you will have more floods in Himalayan flood basins. It will happen over areas of Brahmaputra every year in Assam because of Brahmaputra flood happens. Ganga, Indus, all these have water coming from your glaciers. The area affected by drought has also increased by 1.3% per decade during 1951 to 2016. So more and more drought area. Every decade 1.3% area more. It says that areas over central India, southwestern coast, southern peninsula and northeast India have experienced more than 2 droughts per decade on average during this period 1951 to 2015. What is the cause? Overall decrease of seasonal summer monsoon rainfall. Drought can have a simple reason. Your monsoon is not happening, the rainfall is not happening. During the last 6 to 7 decades, there has been overall decrease of seasonal summer monsoon rainfall. Your southwest monsoon rainfall. What about the sea level rise? See, during 1993 to 2015, sea level over the North Indian Ocean. India is in North Indian Ocean. So you have Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. In that area, sea level has risen by 3.3 millimeter per year. This is huge. Your coast area will be affected. Those are threatened. But overall, this cannot happen in one area. So this is in global mean sea level rise tuning. The global sea level is rising. Your North Indian Ocean level is also rising, whether it is Bay of Bengal or your Arabian Sea. What about sea surface temperature? Till now we were dealing with atmospheric temperature of the land. Now deal about the sea surface temperature. Sea surface temperature of the tropical Indian Ocean has risen by 1 degree Celsius on average in 1951 to 2015. 1 degree Celsius on an average, markedly higher than the global average SST warming of 0.7 degrees Celsius in every decade. So what will happen? More tropical cyclones. Because tropical cyclones need higher temperature, sea surface temperature should increase. In extreme condition, there can inundation problem. These things can come below the sea. For example, Andhra Pradesh coastal area, Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna Delta basin. Coastal hazard in islands can happen. So when the sea surface is temperature is increasing, SST is increasing, you will have tropical cyclones. So let's look about the tropical cyclone. It says that before 1950s, 94 severe cyclonic storms formed in Bay of Bengal, and a number that jumped to 140 post 1950s. Previously 94, now see 140 extreme cyclonic storms. This is about Bay of Bengal. But those formed in the Arabian Sea, the number has risen from 29 to 44. Arabian Sea sees less number of tropical cyclones, right? But this has also risen 29 to 44 during the same period. And now Arabian Sea storms are gaining more strength and the Gujarat Maharashtra coast is threatened, and this is projected to continue now. Report says that frequency of very severe cyclonic storms during the post-monsoon season, after the monsoon generally it happens, during the post-monsoon season has increased significantly, plus 1 event per decade. Per decade, one more event is happening. The extreme cyclonic activity is happening during the last 2 decades. Reason you know already. Sea surface temperature rise, heat content rise. What will happen to Himalayan snow cover now? You know your Afghanistan area Hindu Kush Himalayas? In the last 7 decades, they have warmed at an average of 0.2 degrees Celsius. So maybe the Afghanistan people will be able to do some cropping there because it is otherwise snow area. The Hindu Kush mountains, very cold areas. But anyway, this is not good for global climate. Your Karakoram Himalayas have also reported an increase in snowfall during winter. Okay, this is different. Karakoram Himalayas have reported an increase in snowfall during winter. That is fine. But in Hindu Kush Himalayas, your snow cover and glacier is melting in last 4 to 5 decades. See, decline. Karakoram is having better snowfall during the winter. And it is projected that Hindu Kush Himalaya will be warmer by 2.6 degrees Celsius to 4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Here we are targeting 2 degrees Celsius reduction, and the Hindu Kush will be warming by 4.6 degrees Celsius. What is the benefit? If Hindu Kush warms, many of the glaciers will melt. Because Hindu Kush Himalayas largest area of permanent ice cover outside the north and south pole. This is also known as third pole. Why more snowfall in Karakoram areas? Because of western disturbance. Enhanced amplitude variation of synoptic western disturbance. So more western disturbance towards your Karakoram. So more snowfall there. What are the causes? Cause is the main contributor is your anthropogenic activity, the greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases have led to a rise in temperature and atmospheric moisture content. If you have more anthropogenic water vapor in the air, in turn it will lead to intense rainfall during the monsoon and you will see floods. But what will happen when the global surface temperature, global air temperature rises? The moisture from your soil will be vaporized. The moisture will be vaporized, then plants will not get this moisture. It will result into droughts. This can lead to reduction in food production. And also availability of groundwater will reduce, so your potable water will reduce. In India, 80% pulses, 73% oilseeds and 68% cotton come from rain-fed agriculture. And if that area warms and the soil moisture is taken away in the atmosphere with the vaporization, your food security will be threatened. And water security also. Your droughts and floods are detrimental to surface and groundwater recharge. And if sea level rises, intrusion of salt water will happen. Also, UPSC asked one question that illegal sand mining in the river coastal areas, does that lead to salinization of the salinization of the fresh water or river water? Yes, it does. So the coastal aquifers will have contamination. Groundwater will have contamination of the salt. It is happening in Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Lakshadweep already. Initially, your Brahmaputra, Ganga and Indus will have more water, more flooding because of snow ice melting, right? Glacier melting. But after some time when the glaciers are eroded and taken away in the atmosphere or they go to the sea, after that, no one will be able to supply Indus and Ganga, Brahmaputra the water because the glaciers will melt. They will dry out. So initially you will see the floods and later you will see the drought because Indus, Ganga and Brahmaputra will lack the glacier water. What are the effects? Effects on biodiversity. For example, in India, Indian Ocean is home to 30% of the world's coral reefs. All this will be affected with the fresh water. Coral bleaching will happen with the rise in the temperature of the sea. All your corals, planktons, fisheries will be impacted by a rise in heat waves. A rise in heat wave will lead to oceanic heat wave. That means marine heat waves, okay? Because just simply warming of the sea surface, that is marine heat wave, and that can lead to coral bleaching. Phytoplanktons will also die. Fisheries will hampered. Corals will die. Economy, it will lead to loss in productivity. Desertification will happen. Land degradation will happen. In fact, drought can cost to India, already costing to India 2.5% of the gross domestic product in GDP in 2014-15. In 2014-15, we had huge droughts in the South India, peninsular India. It cost us 2.5% of the GDP loss. Healthcare cost will happen. From the pollution already, healthcare cost to GDP because of pollution is already 8.5% of the GDP. Social issues can happen. People will migrate because of the climate danger, weather change danger. Repeated crop failures can lead to distressed farmer, and distressed farmer can go for suicide. That is a social impact. Now let us start with the last topic. This is a very small topic. Nagar Vana scheme. This is simply urban forestry. You have World Environment Day on 5th of June. Let us first connect the dots. Why do you have World Environment Day on the 5th of June? Because World Environment Day was established in 1972 by the United Nations on the first day of the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment. I just taught you about the Stockholm Conference of the Human Environment 1972. Indira Gandhi participated, right? A Stockholm Conference. here where the UNEP also came in the picture. That day, to commemorate that day on the 5th of June, this 5th of June was the opening day. So that is why we celebrate World Environment Day on 5th of the June. See, I had told you this now. World Environment Day came on 5th of June because this United Nations Conference on the Human Environment or Stockholm Conference was held from June 5th to June 16th in 1972. That is why this date was chosen as World Environment Day. Okay, so on the occasion of World Environment Day 5th of June, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change came with a scheme. The scheme is known as Nagar One scheme or Urban Forestry scheme, simply. Urban Forest, Nagar One. It says that we will establish at least 200 Nagar One. In cities, we will establish at least 200 urban forest in the country in next 5 years. But which kind of cities? Those cities having municipal corporation or municipalities. That is why it will be called urban areas, right? Those cities having municipal corporation or municipalities, and collaboration will be by local communities, educational institutions, local bodies. Which local bodies? Municipal corporation or municipality will be the local body. Educational institution will be taken in confidence. The school going students will do forestry and everything. Local communities will take care. So this is a collaboration effect, and also NGOs are collaborated. A minimum of 20 hectares of forest will be created in the city, either on existing forest land or if there is any vacant land, and your urban local body said that, see, we have this vacant land, we can create an urban forest here, or maybe already existing forest land. Once established by this collaboration, the state government will take over. It will charge some entry fee, make it a park like forest like thing, and there will be some entry fee, and with this entry fee your state government will maintain the one udyan or your urban forest or your Nagar One. 200 Nagar Ones in next 5 years in the entire country, in those areas, those cities having municipal corporation or municipalities. Collaboration is among local community, educational institution, local body and NGOs. So what about those cities which have a forest inside their jurisdiction? Those cities will be encouraged also. Encouragement to cities authorities to have a city forest of area up to 100 hectare in forest area within their jurisdiction. Funding will be done by, in part the funding will be done by CAMPA. You have Compensatory Afforestation Fund Act 2016. I will tell you about CAMPA in the next lecture. This is already becoming a very long lecture, so we will deal with CAMPA also, but later. Funding will be done by partly by CAMPA, Compensatory Afforestation Fund Act 2016. Also, this program Nagar One scheme, I told you the school and children will be involved. So how? It will be linked to a school's nursery yojana. This school nursery yojana is trying to build a bond between students and nature. A school nursery yojana, right? Where children do the nursery, that means plantation and everything. This will be joined with Nagar One scheme. Your local area people will be also taken into confidence. Local bodies will anyway do this. Funding will partly come from CAMPA. And model of the scheme is Pune's urban forest, that is known as Warje urban forest, which is in Pune, Maharashtra. This looks like this. So this is all in this lecture. Told you about the 4 topics, completed 4 topics. Let's meet tomorrow and we will complete more topic of the environment of the June month. Thank you. Notes will be provided very soon, okay?